Why the Russian army is failing to attract new recruits. Living in a world that cherishes and embraces bravery is one of the most fundamental aspects of societal and economic development and prosperity. Why is it that the Russian military is having a hard time enlisting young men and women? Is it because they've lost faith in their military-industrial complex? Or are there other, more profound and hidden reasons that have slowly poisoned the notion of patriotism? A brief overview of what's going wrong with Russian military enlisting. In one of his victory parade speeches earlier in 2023, the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, equated the war against Ukraine with the invasion of Nazi Germany into the Soviet Union during World War II. Putin stated that after that big war, this new war poses an even greater threat to the Russian way of life. Putin has also made in-depth logistical plans to send additional troops to fight in Ukraine, 500,000. But what's even more interesting is the fact that he also introduced a legislative bill concerning the enlisting process, effectively digitalizing the documentation processes of new recruits, making it even more cumbersome for young men and women to escape having to serve. You see, towards the end of 2022, hundreds of thousands of people fled Russia to avoid being drafted. This is why the government is so aggressively marketing the whole notion of Russian warrior masculinity and why joining the army is the ultimate way of proving your patriotism. According to a comprehensive study conducted by Maya Eichler, a Canadian researcher, she was able to determine that in comparison with the Soviet Union, where up to 85% of eligible men were conscripted by the military, roughly 10 years or more after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian army only managed to conscript up to 30% of eligible men. The reasons? Well, Eichler's research also comprised interviews of Russian men who were asked how they looked at the modern Russian military complex, and the answers were surprising. A lot of the men interviewed only had negative things to say. For instance, most believe that the Russian military is ridiculously corrupt and dishonest, has an irrecoverable system, has rotten leadership, and harbors a shameful practice of constant bullying and hazing. Importance of understanding the reasons behind the reluctance to join the Russian military. One of the central reasons why military-aged men and women are looking for ways to either legally or illegally avoid being conscripted into the army is that the country is constantly involved in waging unnecessary conflicts and disputes. Many young men and women don't want to be unnecessarily deployed in war zones and face the risk of injuries or death. In addition, young people are also quite apprehensive about how the rest of the world portrays Russia, which isn't very good to say the least. Moreover, a lot of people want to pursue their dreams and ambitions rather than waste their lives fighting someone else's wars. They want to pursue higher education and look for lucrative employment opportunities both in Russia and abroad. They deeply prioritize these options compared to enlisting in the military. And why not? Civilian careers offer far better monetary and lifestyle benefits compared to the military, where none of them can even hope to climb the ladder of prosperity and personal growth. In summary, the reluctance of individuals to join the Russian military can be attributed to various factors, including societal, economic, and political issues. Socioeconomic factors. It has become painfully apparent that the Russian military is losing control of its civilian contractors due to rapidly depleting finances. As per information gathered from a civilian trade union that is linked with the armed forces of the Russian Federation, it has been identified that many soldiers and military employees profusely complain about low wages, not being paid on time, and mass layoffs. It seems that there is a deep unrest within the military-industrial complex, and a lot of personnel are quitting the army due to a sudden decrease in wages and a growing decline in living standards. And because of broad-spectrum sanctions imposed on Russia, the military had to close down factories and fire employees, giving them only two choices: either to continue their employment at zero pay or to join the military as soldiers and fight in the war against Ukraine. Both of them are bleak. Challenges faced by military families due to low income. There have also been widespread complaints made by the Russian ground troops in Ukraine that they are not being paid enough and that they are not being paid in full and on time, creating a dearth of difficulties for their families. Many soldiers have to contend with empty promises, and most haven't been paid in months, making it difficult for their families to buy basic necessities. The problems grow worse for soldiers who have children. Most can't even afford to buy diapers and essential food items. It's absolutely dismal to know that many of the soldiers are being paid a maximum of 20 to 30,000 Russian rubles, or $250 to $300. Poor living conditions and lack of basic amenities in military barracks. The failure of the Russian military to cope with the decline in essential amenities and necessities to help soldiers has led to widespread disappointment and hopelessness amidst the Russian troops. Coupled with the delay in payments, Russia has lost its reputation as having brave and enduring frontline fighters. This has helped Ukraine implement a brutal and systematic plan to continuously demoralize Russian soldiers, and it has worked. With these realities in mind, the overall Russian morale has been significantly struck down. The impending notion of serving indefinitely in the war, little to no rest and relaxation, inadequate supplies, and lack of combat training have led to Russian soldiers spiraling down into desperation. Couple that with excessive combat stress, the soldiers continue to display feelings of resentment, anger, and utter helplessness. Political factors, controversial military engagements, and international relations. There's deep resentment amongst the locals in Russia as well as the international community itself. According to a survey conducted in 2022, shortly after the war started, it was identified that an average of 90% of people across more than 17 countries stated that they have zero confidence in Vladimir Putin to set things right, not just in the war against Ukraine, but throughout his government's global affairs. Only a measly 9% show some confidence in his ideologies. It is also difficult to gauge the sentiments of the Russians on a more accurate scale because of the widespread crackdown against anti-war sentiments. The people aren't allowed to publicly express their beliefs, and many have been incarcerated. Fear of being sent to dangerous missions. The Russian government has displayed very little regard for its ground troops in Ukraine over the course of 12-plus months. You have to understand that the frontline fighters were initially deployed under the guise of routine combat training. They didn't know they were about to invade Ukraine. They were illegally sent to Ukraine to wage a war. Amongst the soldiers were also individuals who were medically ineligible or unfit to serve in the army, but they were forced to fight. The soldiers were mobilized for combat and were told to bring their own medical essentials because the military did not have enough supplies. On top of that, several reports were coming out of the Ukraine that a lot of young Russian soldiers were nothing but frightened teenagers who couldn't handle the combat stress and would often burst out crying when they were held prisoner. Lack of trust in government and military leadership. Corruption within the military system. Since the war between both countries began, analysts reported that the Russian military consecutively failed to supply its frontline fighters with the necessary supplies. There were widespread fuel shortages. The troops were given faulty or civilian-grade radio systems, and most of them did not receive any winter clothing and food supplies. What's disturbing is that some believe that these supply shortages were caused by rampant corruption and embezzlement among senior officers. It is difficult to prove just why these shortages occurred. Understand that in 2022, the federal government invested more than $60 billion in its military. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, this is the fourth largest military budget. However, it is beginning to show that the money wasn't spent where it was needed, and it is quite possible that people high on the food chain lined their pockets in the form of kickbacks and blatant theft. Doubt about the government's ability to address military personnel's concerns. Owing to several of the reasons we have discussed thus far, it can be seen that Russia is rapidly failing to complete its primary military plans in Ukraine. The Russian president miscalculated and perhaps was under delusions of grandeur when he stated that he expected to control and seize Kiev in a mere 2 days. It's been more than 500 days since the war began, and thus far, more than 50,000 soldiers have perished. It's safe to say that Russia is now on the back foot, and with poor leadership, rampant food and supply shortages, insufficient troops, sanctions, and depleting financial resources, it isn't looking good for the Soviets. Social and cultural factors. Stigmatization of military service in society. There's plenty of stigmatization for military personnel in the society. For instance, there's a widespread stereotype that soldiers and other military employees have aggressive and confrontational personality traits and that they are prone to violence. However, in reality, enlisting in the military comes with a great deal of disciplinary training that focuses on fighting with honor, being clear on the rules of engagement, and conducting oneself as per a strict code of conduct. Excessive or lethal force is often used as a last resort. Similarly, some people also believe that military personnel are blindly obedient to their superiors. While this following order is a very important facet of the military, it is also true that many soldiers and other essential personnel are critical thinkers, calm, and have profound abilities to survive in different combat or non-combat situations. Limited opportunities for personal and professional growth. While many individuals choose to pursue their educational goals during their military service or after they are discharged, it is equally important to understand the various ways that joining the Army can limit your opportunities for personal growth. For instance, there isn't a lot of diversification within the Army in the sense of climbing a corporate ladder of success. There aren't any profound career fields that every soldier can pursue because of the way they have been specifically trained. Although a military establishment can offer various educational opportunities within the system, a soldier or military professional won't have as many options compared to what civilian colleges and universities can offer. In addition, because soldiers are frequently and indefinitely deployed in different combat or reconnaissance zones locally and/or internationally, it can completely disrupt their personal and family lives. It will become harder for the individual to create a degree of stability when it comes to forming long-term relationships. Psychological and health factors. Mental and emotional stress associated with military service. There's a great deal of emotional and mental stress that soldiers have to deal with. They're deployed in combat zones and are often exposed to brutal and traumatic experiences such as shooting or decimating their enemies violently. On the other hand, their emotional stress can also stem from the loss of one of their own, their friends and colleagues, whom they trained with. These are some of the many factors that cause military personnel to experience post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, depression, and other debilitating mental health conditions, health risks, and inadequate medical care. Moreover, military personnel deployed in high-risk combat areas can easily expose themselves to hazardous chemicals, sustain bullet wounds, be injured due to explosives, etc. All these things can cause great mental and physical scarring, which can further contribute to their mental health. In addition, a lack of proper healthcare resources or medical treatment centers can delay getting treated for severe injuries, disabilities, and illnesses. And because they are deployed on foreign soil, they will not have access to the best surgeons and medical facilities, which can further minimize the efficacy of medical interventions. So there you have it, a comprehensive look into some profound reasons why the Russian military is failing to recruit young and eligible recruits, why they're facing difficulties in pushing back the Ukrainian forces, and how they are failing to instill any hope and motivation in their frontline soldiers.